I have been asked that question more times than I can count. By caseworkers, by strangers, by people who meant well and people who didn't. And every single time I had to decide, do I explain? Do I break down the whole architecture of my family, my identity, my history, in 2 minutes or less, for someone who is already moving on to the next question on their intake form? This is my life. I'm going to tell it plainly. I want to start with something that sounds simple on the surface. A question. Don't you have family who can help? It gets asked constantly. To people experiencing homelessness, in shelters, in intake offices, in waiting rooms where you've already told your story 4 times to 4 different people, and you're so tired of your own voice you'd give anything for someone to just stop asking. The question assumes something. It assumes that family is a resource, that it's available, that it's safe. For some people that's true, and if you're one of those people, if you have a family that would answer the phone, open a door, wire money, drive across a state, I want you to understand something before we go any further. That is not a given. That is a profound, specific privilege that millions of people do not have. Family is not a biological fact. It's a set of conditions: support, acceptance, safety. When you're queer and black and your family runs on religion and silence, those 3 things rarely arrive in the same package. I have been navigating housing instability since January 2022. Tents on concrete slabs with wooden pallets underneath. No AC, no privacy, no guarantee of safety. Shelters built for compliance, not recovery. Rooming houses where a roommate pulled a gun on me the night he found out I was gay. An ICU stay, 3 weeks, with shingles. My body finally surrendering what my mind had refused to. And the whole time, every single time, don't you have family who can help? Yes, I have family. But I need you to understand what that actually meant in practice. Because the word family carries so much assumption inside it that it becomes almost useless when you try to apply it to real circumstances. Family isn't a biological fact. It's a set of conditions. I reached out. I asked for help. The answer wasn't just no. It was a door I didn't realize had already been closed. I was told I was making bad decisions, that I needed to figure it out on my own. There was no offer of help. No acknowledgement of how desperate things had become. Just the particular cruelty of rejection dressed up as accountability. That response confirmed something I had carried my whole life without a name for it. I was alone. Not in the way people use that word loosely, but alone in the structural sense. No net, no floor. Just the permanent condition of not being someone others were willing to catch. No net, no floor. My grandmother was the exception in my family. I was her favorite grandchild, and she made no secret of it. She loved me with a favoritism that was visible and warm and real. The kind of love that doesn't ask you to explain yourself, doesn't attach conditions, doesn't flinch. But when I went to college, I made a choice. I pulled away. From her, from all of them. Because the family's disapproval of my homosexuality had become something I couldn't keep absorbing. Every visit had a weight to it. Every phone call carried a silence that said what nobody would say out loud. I chose distance as a form of survival. I thought there would be time later. There wasn't. She died before I became homeless, before I ever had the chance to go back. I can't tell you what she would have done. I don't know. What I know is that she's gone, and I'm the one who created the distance, and she died before I could decide whether to close it. That particular grief doesn't have a clean name. It lives somewhere between loss and regret, and it doesn't move when you push it. I want to be clear about something. The estrangement from my family was not simply something that happened to me. I made choices. Protective choices, but choices nonetheless. I pulled away because staying connected cost me something I couldn't keep paying. That is what homophobia inside families actually does. It doesn't always look like a dramatic disownment. Sometimes it looks like a slow erosion, a steady accumulation of silences and discomforts and messages, never said directly, never needing to be, that add up over years to a single conclusion. You are not quite acceptable as you are, and at some point you have to decide whether to keep absorbing that message or stop. I stopped. The cost of that decision arrived later in ways I didn't fully anticipate. But I would make it again, because the alternative, staying connected to people who couldn't fully accept me, performing okayness I didn't feel, swallowing myself to keep the peace, that was its own kind of homelessness. People imagine homelessness as a single image: a person on the sidewalk, a cardboard sign, a cold night. The reality is a spectrum of indignity that most housed people never have to see up close. And even the people living it, even we, don't always recognize the full shape of what we're surviving until we're on the other side of it. Tents on concrete slabs, wooden pallets underneath, no AC, no privacy, no guarantee of safety. The shelter experience is dehumanizing in ways that resist easy description. You're surrounded by people fighting the same invisible war. Sometimes there's solidarity in that, real solidarity, the kind born from shared wreckage. You meet people in shelters who would give you their last dollar and mean it. But there's also desperation, conflict, a heaviness that sits on your chest like something physical and doesn't lift when you lie down at night, because where you're lying down is not safe, and your body knows it even when your mind is trying to rest. The rules are rigid, infantilizing, curfews that treat you like a child. No visitors, no belongings that don't fit in a bag. Privacy doesn't exist. Safety isn't guaranteed. I've watched people spiral into addiction because the pain of being awake and aware was worse than the alternative. I've felt the judgment radiating off staff members who look at you like you are a problem to be managed, not a person in crisis. 5 months in one place, a locked computer lab, Chromebooks behind glass, no AC, your whole life reduced to what you can carry, and when you're allowed to access it. Your whole life reduced to what you can carry. I want to pause here because I think people underestimate what it does to a person, not just physically, but psychologically, to exist without permanence for extended periods of time. Human beings are not built for that kind of sustained uncertainty. We need to know where we're sleeping. We need to know our things will be there in the morning. We need the basic architecture of a life: an address, a door that locks, a place where we can be off duty for a few hours. When you don't have those things, survival becomes a full-time job. And full-time survival doesn't leave much room for anything else. Not healing, not planning, not becoming. And then people ask you why you haven't gotten back on your feet yet. The statistics are clear. LGBTQ+ people, especially youth, are disproportionately represented in homeless populations, and family rejection is the most documented reason why. My experience fits that pattern with a precision that's almost instructive. Nobody formally disowned me. There was no dramatic scene, no final ultimatum. There was just the slow accumulation of a message, delivered through silences, through discomfort left unaddressed, through the particular way religious families manage members who don't conform. Not cruelty exactly. Something quieter than cruelty. Just a consistent, unmistakable withholding. You are not quite acceptable as you are. That message starts early, and it compounds. By the time I was navigating homelessness, I had already spent years managing the psychological weight of being queer in a family and a culture that didn't know what to do with me. That weight doesn't go away when you lose your housing. It goes with you into the shelter, into the tent, into every intake form that asks for your emergency contact, and you have to decide how to answer. In queer community, I found the pockets of acceptance my family never provided. But community also has a shadow. I encountered people who offered help with conditions attached, a place to stay in exchange for something physical, support that was conditional on romantic or sexual involvement. When you're desperate, those offers can feel like lifelines. They are not. They are a different kind of abuse wearing a more familiar outfit. When you're desperate, truly desperate, the kind of desperate that doesn't look like what you imagined desperate would look like, your threshold for what you're willing to tolerate shifts in ways that are hard to explain to someone who hasn't been there. You make calculations that aren't really calculations. You weigh options that aren't really options. Sleep on the street or stay somewhere that makes you unsafe. I've had to make those choices, and the scars from those choices don't disappear when you finally get a key to your own door. They follow you in. There is something I need to say directly to anyone watching this who works in social services, in shelters, in housing assistance. The shelter system is largely built on binary gender categories. The intake process, the sleeping arrangements, the bathroom access, all of it designed around an assumption about who's actually walking through those doors. Being queer in that environment adds a layer of navigation and performance and vigilance that housed people never have to think about. You are already in crisis, and the system asks you, on top of everything else, to manage how visible you are, to calculate safety in a new environment full of strangers, to decide again whether it's safe to be yourself here. You are already in crisis, and the system asks you to manage how visible you are. That is an additional tax on survival that nobody should have to pay. Mental health and homelessness feed each other in a way that is vicious and circular and almost impossible to interrupt from the inside. The stress of being unhoused makes everything worse. When everything's worse, climbing out feels impossible. When climbing out feels impossible, the stress compounds, and the loop tightens. The stress makes everything worse. Everything worse makes climbing out feel impossible. Impossible makes the stress compound. The loop tightens. I've dealt with anxiety and depression most of my life. Since becoming homeless, they intensified to a level I didn't know existed. There are days when getting off the floor of a shelter felt like the hardest thing a human being could be asked to do. The future looked like a wall. Hope felt like something that happened to other people. Access to mental health care when you're unhoused is a cruel bureaucratic joke. Resources exist, technically, but they're overwhelmed, underfunded, nearly impossible to navigate in crisis. Medication requires prescriptions. Prescriptions require follow-up appointments. Appointments require a stable address, a working phone, reliable transportation. Stable address, working phone, reliable transportation. Bandwidth to manage a 3-month waitlist. When you have none of those things, maintaining your mental health becomes one more system that was never designed to include you. And when you finally do break, when the weight becomes physically unbearable, when your body stops cooperating, when you end up in an ICU because 3 years of survival stress has finally metabolized into shingles, the system stabilizes you enough to discharge you back into the same conditions that broke you. That's not treatment. That is triage. And when you come out the other side of that, if you come out the other side, you are expected to be grateful. The systems supposedly designed to help you are often the hardest things to survive. To access most resources, you need identification documents. Easy to lose when everything you own fits in a bag. You need proof of address. Impossible when you don't have one. You need a phone number. Hard to maintain when you can't charge it. You need the ability to show up to appointments during specific business hours. Challenging when you're spending every waking minute trying to eat, stay safe, and stay functional. ID documents, proof of address, working phone, business hours availability, energy to perform, a story you can tell in under 2 minutes. Again, and again, and again. I've spent countless hours in waiting rooms, filling out the same forms, telling my story to caseworkers who are burnt out and doing their absolute best, and still cannot move the mountain. Every agency has different requirements, different eligibility criteria, different waiting periods. Housing assistance wait lists stretch for years. Emergency help is exactly what it says: emergency, short-term, designed to stabilize, not solve. Employment programs assume stable housing. The whole architecture loops back on itself, and the exit keeps moving. This is not an accident. I want to say that clearly because I think we often describe the dysfunction of social services as incompetence or underfunding, and while both of those things are real, there is also something structural happening. A system that requires this much of people already in crisis is not a system designed to actually move people out of crisis. It is a system designed to manage people in crisis, indefinitely, at the lowest possible cost. Not designed to move people out of crisis, designed to manage people in crisis, indefinitely. There's a pervasive cultural assumption that homelessness is personal failure, that if you were smarter, more disciplined, more motivated, you wouldn't be here. That assumption does real damage, not just to the people experiencing homelessness, but to the public's willingness to actually fix anything. Because if it's a personal failing, then it's not a systems problem. And if it's not a systems problem, then you don't have to restructure anything. You just have to feel bad for a moment and keep walking. I've been told to just get a job by people who don't understand that getting a job requires an address for applications, a phone for callbacks, clothes for interviews, and the energy to perform. Energy that evaporates when you haven't slept safely in weeks. I've been told to ask family for help by people who've never experienced rejection. I've been told resources are available by people who've never tried to navigate them in crisis. Just get a job. Ask family for help. Resources are available. And alongside the judgment, there's the invisibility. People look through you on the street. You become part of the background, a problem to be stepped around, not a person to be acknowledged. Both of those things hurt. The judgment and the erasure. One makes you feel blamed. The other makes you feel like you've already stopped existing. Despite everything, there have been people who reminded me I was still a person. The librarian who looked the other way when I spent hours every day using the library as a safe space rather than for research. The social worker who treated me like a human being instead of a case number. Friends who bought me meals, who sat with me without needing me to perform recovery for their comfort. Strangers who made eye contact, said hello, acknowledged that I was there. A single act of being seen can be the distance between staying and not. I don't say that lightly. I mean it as precisely as it sounds. These moments don't repair systems. They don't fix housing policy or streamline bureaucracy or change the way religious families teach their children to love conditionally. But when you are at the bottom, truly at the bottom, where the bottom has a bottom, a single act of being seen can be the distance between staying and not. I don't know what the next chapter looks like entirely. I know that housing won't magically heal everything, won't repair my family, won't erase years of accumulated trauma, won't bring back the people I lost to distance and time and a silence I created because I had to. But it gives me a foundation, a stable place from which to do the real work, the healing, the building, the becoming. The healing, the building, the becoming. I've navigated family rejection, systemic barriers, and personal hells I wouldn't wish on anyone. 4 years of it, and I'm still here. That matters. Not as a triumph, not as a redemption arc, just as a fact. I'm still here. And that's enough for today.